Welcome to your 5-letter word. I'm your host, Christina, and in each episode, we explore how intentional communication and a strong mindset can transform your business, your relationships, and your personal growth. Whether we're covering communication strategies or sharing tips to shift your mindset, this podcast will help you learn to create more meaningful conversations in your life so that you can deepen your relationships and grow your business. So sit back, relax, and soak in the insights as we dive into today's conversation. Welcome back to this episode of your 5-letter word. Today, we're going to be talking about nonverbal cues, what they are, and why they matter. All right, to start off, nonverbal cues, think of it as literally your body speaking to other people. And your face speaking to other people, if I'm being honest. Okay, so your nonverbal cues is the facial expressions that you're making, as well as the way that you are carrying yourself, the way that your body is positioned, and these subtle signs that your body is making that really display what you are thinking and feeling in the moment. Okay? When it comes to nonverbal cues, it's important to remember that just like you are having nonverbal reactions and you are making nonverbal, behaviors and cues for the other person, you are able to interpret what the other person is potentially thinking and feeling and how they're reacting to what you're saying based on their nonverbal cues. Now, advanced tip, nonverbal cues, you and the other person, it really is a two-way street that bounces off each other. So if one person changes their nonverbal cues and starts displaying signs of disagreement or negativity, the other person picks up on that and starts to do the same, which sort of starts to spiral and creates more of that disagreement and negativity, unless you know how to spot it, how to catch it, how to address it. Okay? So if you're interested in learning more about nonverbal cues, let's dive into this episode. And for all my friends listening on the podcast, I appreciate you. Just letting you know that there is a YouTube video version as well, so that you can visually see some of the things that I'm talking about. All right, starting with nonverbals in terms of your body language. Your nonverbal cues, your body language, really go from your head all the way down to your toes. And your facial expressions, which I personally view as slightly different, because we often have so little awareness of what our face is doing and control over how we're reacting. And the reason for that is because most people don't actually spend the time learning what their face looks like, learning what their facial expressions and reactions look like, and being mindful of that in the moment in a conversation. Okay? So starting with your body language from head to toe, it's important to understand some of the basics so that you can start to see for yourself when you are experiencing this. And you can also start to pick up on it from other people when you're having a conversation. So these are going to be general guidelines. The thing that I want you to keep in mind is this. Although many body language cues are almost universal in a sense, they give you a very good indication of what the person is thinking or feeling. There is room for error and there is room for personal interpretation. So some people may naturally look or react a little bit different than others. So take this with a grain of salt. Try it out on multiple people and see whether the things that you're picking up on match how the conversation's going or what they're thinking. Okay? Another very important distinction I'll make from the get-go is it's very important to start to notice changes as well as patterns. So when I say changes, I'm really referring to a change in someone's nonverbal, behaviors, nonverbal expressions in the middle of a conversation. And the reason I bring this up is because people who shift or change at a specific moment in a conversation, there's a very good chance that it matches up with a shift or change in their emotional or their thought reaction to something that was just said. So if you are, let's say, sitting still, right? You're sitting in a chair, perhaps you're even leaning forward because you're engaged in the conversation and you're talking to the other person and you bring up an idea or perhaps bring up a criticism, bring up a point. And all of a sudden there's that change where now they lean back. Maybe they even shift a little bit away from you. Maybe they even cross their arms. Those are the changes that you need to be mindful of because then you recognize, all right, they disagree with what I said. They're offended by what I said. They didn't like it. And then you can catch that and you can dress it accordingly. Okay. You might soften your delivery if you're giving some feedback. You might bring it up and say, hey, I'm sorry if I offended you. What I really meant was, right? You're able to catch it and address it in the moment. Versus if you're not aware of nonverbal cues and you might have irked someone, you might have offended them, and now they're leaning away from you. They're losing interest. They're feeling a little frustrated. They don't want to be in the conversation. If you're oblivious to that and you're continuing the conversation, maybe you're even pitching your services or pitching some sort of project, you're not recognizing the fact that they're in a place that's more negative and it's likely not going to go well. Okay. Versus if you were able to address the issue based on the change in their body language, you'd be able to pick up on that, say, hey, I'm so sorry if I offended you. What I really meant was that this. Speaking of which, hey, would you be open to hearing about? And then pitch your services, right? Like you're able to have more nuance and more personalization in your interactions that really help address what it is that is happening in the moment. And that's a fantastic way to prevent miscommunication. Okay. So that's paying attention to change. The other thing I want you to start doing is paying attention to patterns. Now, this means paying attention to your own patterns, which is really the habits that you have when it comes to your body language and your facial expressions, as well as the patterns of others. Now, here's why this is important. When you are aware of your own patterns, you start to get a much better understanding of what other people see and what other people experience when they are communicating with you. So often, we kind of make this assumption that people get us, people understand us. We almost have this assumption that we're good communicators and we've communicated effectively. People should get it. And if people don't get it, if there's any miscommunication, we almost jump to blame immediately. And we say, well, why didn't they get it? What's wrong with them? Why didn't they understand? But really, it is your job to communicate well. And it is your job to communicate effectively with your words, with your body language, with your facial expressions. Okay? It is not their job to understand you. It is your job to communicate so effectively that you make it as easy as possible for them to understand your point. Okay? So when you are aware of your own patterns, that's when you can really get clear on what you look like, what you sound like, what other people think of you, in a sense, and then use that to your advantage. Change it if you need to. Play around with it. As an example, many people are familiar with resting, sad face, resting uninterested face, resting dissatisfied face. It's essentially the facial expression that many people make that to them is their neutral state. It's just the way that they are, is how they would say it. It is a facial expression that they make when they are just neutral, plain. They just are. But to other people, it looks like they're completely disinterested. It looks like they're completely dissatisfied. It looks like they're mad or angry. And if you are talking to someone who looks like they're dissatisfied and angry, then that doesn't make you feel good. So that's where becoming aware of your own patterns is really, really crucial and critical, because that's when it clicks. And that's when you can start to put the pieces together and say, hey, I've been having conversations with people and it hasn't been going well. The problem is me. The problem is my communication. The problem is the way that I look and I portray myself, right? When you can start to put the pieces together, don't take it personally. Don't take it as something wrong with you. Take it as useful information that you can use to your advantage. Now that you know you're doing this, now that you know that you may be doing this incorrectly, fantastic. Now you can change. So rather than continuing to have conversations that don't go well, rather than continuing to have conversations where people think you are dissatisfied the whole time, now you can change that. And now you can see improvements. And that's a beautiful thing. So I will encourage you to do that. Okay. Now, patterns, sticking to patterns, it is important to identify the patterns of the other people, especially if this is someone that you will be talking to repeatedly. So if you're a leader and you have your team, you can start to pick up on the patterns and like the default go-to behaviors of each team member. Because again, everyone's a little bit different. Everyone's got that personalization to their body language. But when you know what their patterns are, when you know what their default is, that's when you can pick up on the change and that's when you can address it. So let's say you have a team member who is always happy, right? Let's go with someone who's always positive, always happy, always looking on, the glass is half full kind of person. And they tend to be bubbly, they tend to be optimistic. When you talk to them, they're upbeat, they smile, they're happy. And now you're talking about a project and they are slouching and they are retreating within themselves. They're making themselves small. Maybe their face looks long, like they quite literally look sad, overwhelmed, frustrated. That is a major trigger for you to pick up on. That's a major change to notice so that you can say, hey, I'm noticing this, you might be experiencing some challenges with this. I'm noticing that this seems to be something that is weighing heavy on your mind. Would you mind if we talked about it? Right? You can address it then and there because you have the cognitive capacity to pick up on the changes and the cues of what you're seeing. Okay? So just to recap, your nonverbal cues is your body language and your facial expressions from your head all the way down to your toes that gives people information about what you are thinking and feeling. It is important to pay attention to your own body language, just like it is important to pay attention to other people's body language. It is crucial that you become clear on what your go-to nonverbal behaviors are, just like it's important that you start paying attention to the patterns of the people that you interact with frequently so that you are able to notice any changes that occur, especially if it's in the middle of a conversation. Okay? All right. As a quick side note, if you're looking to figure out how to figure out what your nonverbal cues even are, one of the best ways to do this, okay, two ways. One of the best ways is to record yourself when you're doing something that you would naturally do. If you were to put up your phone and record yourself, knowing that you're recording yourself to check yourself, a little meta there, your whole body language would be swayed. You would not be acting naturally because you would know that you're recording yourself and you're about to watch that recording. So don't do that. Instead, if you are going to be, let's say, working for an hour, put up your phone to the side. The further away that you can, the better, so that you get an accurate assessment of your entire body language as much as possible. And just record yourself and forget that it's there and act naturally. If you are perhaps having dinner with your family, put the phone to the side and watch yourself, watch it back, and notice things like, what does your facial expressions look like? What does your facial expression look like when you are not talking? What does it look like when you are talking? What does it look like when you're listening? What does your body, your posture say? Are you paying attention and like directing yourself to the people that you're talking to? Are you zoned out? Do you look confident? Do you look like an authority? Do you look like you are comfortable? Because many people look uncomfortable, right? Start to pay attention to the little things. Now, the caveat to this, when you do that, it is easy to become overwhelmed, okay? It is easy to look at yourself, get overwhelmed and not know what to do. And you're like, oh, this sucks. I'm terrible. I give up. Don't do that. Instead, really just pick the one thing that stands out to you as something you'd like to improve and focus on that one thing at a time. That is the trick for growth, okay? When you're DIYing this at home, just pick one thing and work on that one thing until you actually see changes in it. And then keep working on it so that you don't lose the momentum and you don't lose the changes and default back to what you were used to. Most of our nonverbal cues are habits that we have developed over years, if not decades. So, spending a couple days, spending a couple hours, spending a couple weeks likely won't create that long lasting sustainable change. And that makes sense because if it took you years to form a habit, you won't break it in hours. It's, it's just so unlikely. Okay. Let's be honest here. So go into it with the expectation of this is something I'm going to work on for the next several weeks consistently. And when I say consistently, it doesn't mean you're going to do it once a day. It doesn't mean you're going to do it twice a day. It means you're going to do it as often as you can, especially when you remember. So, the beautiful thing about nonverbal cues is that we are doing them all the time, whether we know it or not, every conversation, but also every task that we're doing. Even if we're not talking to someone else, our body language is still expressing how we are feeling in the moment. So, if you're sitting at your desk and you are working, so let's say you're leading, you're a leader, you're leading your team, you're sitting at work, perhaps you have your office door open, you're working on the computer, but the stuff that you're working on is difficult, draining, you don't like it, you don't enjoy it, whatever, and you are slouched over your computer, your brows furrowed, you look angry, you look frustrated, but your team member has a question to ask you. How much anxiety and hesitation do you think they're going to feel knocking on your door and asking for a moment of your time when you look annoyed and frustrated and irked? Eh, they're not going to feel that great. Versus if you're aware of your body language and your nonverbal cues, that's when you start working on it. That's when you start catching yourself. Okay, I'm working on my computer. I'm feeling frustrated. What do I look like and feel like right now? Okay, my shoulders are bent. I'm slouched over. My brow is furrowed. I'm angry. Okay, let me reset. Keep working. Half an hour later, check in again. You likely will be back in this position. And that's okay. That's normal. Give yourself the permission to just keep checking in and asking yourself, what is my body language? What does my face look like right now? And then reset. Okay? Okay. So that's the importance of really understanding the power of nonverbal cues and facial expressions. Now, let's get into what some of these things actually look like. Okay. So, generally speaking, starting from our feet, the direction of our feet indicates the direction that we are engaged in. So, if you're having a conversation with someone, let's say you are standing and you're having a one on one conversation, and you notice that someone's feet start, they start shifting, they start fidgeting, and they move their feet away from you, that's a good indication that they are very likely trying to disengage from the conversation. They either don't, really want to talk to you anymore. They have something else on their mind. They have somewhere else they want to be. So the direction of their feet can really be an indication of where their mind is at. Let's say you're in a meeting and you notice someone is consistently shifting in their chair and their feet are always pointing towards the door. So maybe their feet are pointing, maybe they crossed their legs and their feet are still pointing. That's a good indication that they want to leave the meeting. Okay. So direction of the feet is sort of an indication of where their mind is at. Engage with you or not. Okay. Next is legs. Legs can be a little bit tricky depending on whether you're sitting or standing. Generally speaking, if someone is standing and they are, shifting their weight back and forth, if they're fidgeting a lot, sure, they may need to pee, but more likely they are feeling uncomfortable, they're feeling nervous, they're feeling uncertain. Many people tend to shift their weight and fidget with their legs when they're feeling anxious. Versus someone who has their feet planted firm and they're just standing still, they're feeling comfortable, they're likely feeling very secure, and they're likely feeling fine in the conversation. Okay? Next would be your posture. Are you standing straight, feeling confident, versus slouching, feeling uncertain, insecure, maybe anxious, right? Your arms, are your arms loose and easy to move, or are they clenched really tight beside your body, right? Are you comfortable and fine and feeling confident to speak freely, or are you feeling really uptight? Maybe because you, again, feel nervous. Maybe because you don't want to be there. Maybe because you are feeling, some fear, some anxiety, right? Hands, getting to the hands. Are your hands open, which again, comfortable, confidence, feeling okay, feeling secure, versus are they clenched? Are they tight? Are they moving around because you are self soothing, right? These are all different signs of, again, feeling insecure in the situation, uncertain, right? Anxious, the same types of feelings, right? So we'll stick with confident or insecure or for simplicity, right? So pay attention to people's arms and people's hands. Now, caveat, I understand many people speak with their hands. And that's okay because you can still notice a lot about someone's hands when they speak with their hands, right? If someone keeps coming back, if they're speaking with their hands and they keep coming back to really clenched fists, that is a lot of anxiety and a lot of, self-soothing kind of behavior where they feel secure and confident back in themselves versus feeling confident in the situation and just being able to move a little bit more freely. Any sort of touching, rubbing yourself, going over your belly, um, almost like petting yourself. These are all sort of self-soothing behaviors when people are feeling really lacking confidence in the moment. So that self-soothing is a way for us to make us feel better, essentially, and to help us ground ourselves and feel more secure in the moment. Now, and then head, last would be head. Again, same thing to the feet. Is the person looking at you? Are they paying attention to you? Are they looking away from you? Are they constantly looking away from you because they're trying to give you signs that they're done with the conversation? Right. And then going back to posture for a second, leaning in is always a very good indication that the person's engaged with you, versus leaning out is usually a good sign that they are trying to get as far away as they can. Now I know, again, caveats. This is where we look for changes, especially if the changes correspond to specific changes in the conversation and patterns. Some people naturally like to lean back. They find it more comfortable. It's actually more, confident and secure because they're able to lean back. They feel fine. They're great. Versus if someone is, again, you're looking at posture altogether. This is why nonverbals matter because you're not I feel like often when I break body language down for people, they almost have like a that sounds obvious moments. But the real key to understanding nonverbal cues is putting everything together, seeing the whole picture and understanding the whole package of what is happening. What is the person saying? What is their body language saying? What is their facial expression saying? Okay. And when you're able to put the pieces together, that's when you become such a better communicator. That's when you understand the conversation so much better. So sure, one nonverbal cue on its own may or may not be a good indication, but learn to read the whole package of what you're seeing. So if you're sitting there and someone may be leaning back, they're confident, they're talking with their hands, they're fine, their feet are facing towards you, they're looking at you, they're engaged. Fantastic. A good indication that they are in the conversation with you. They're just leaning back, right? Whole picture. Versus someone is leaning forward, but they're making themselves as small as possible. They're hunched. They keep fidgeting. They keep crossing and uncrossing their legs. They keep glancing at the door, right? Sure, they're leaning forward, but all other cues in the whole picture tell you they don't really want to be there. They're not really feeling the conversation. Something is making them uncomfortable, right? Understanding the whole picture matters. So to wrap up, going to your facial expressions, this is really where it will take a lot of time and a lot of self-reflection to look in the mirror and to really understand your own facial expressions. But generally speaking, most of us by now have a good indications of what people's facial expressions convey. So whether they're happy, whether they're sad, whether they're angry, whether they're neutral, bored, right? So the basics there. And then just start paying attention to, again, the changes in the facial expressions based on what the conversation, what has been said in the conversation at that point. So the key here is to really put the two together. Is someone smiling and telling you, okay, that sounds fantastic. I'll think about that deal that you just proposed? but they're leaning away from you and their feet are pointing towards the door and they're checking their time and their facial expressions is kind of like not really positive and supportive. Again, whole picture. Okay? So nonverbal cues matter. Nonverbal cues are important. And as much as some people want to deny the importance of nonverbal cues, they are happening whether you like it or not, whether you know it or not. You are giving people information about your thoughts and your reactions with what you are doing nonverbally, just like other people are doing the same for you. So learning them is a crucial skill that will help you understand communication so much better. Now, as we wrap up today's episode, my 5-letter word for you is smile. Often, nonverbal cues for many of us, the default is a little bit more on the negative side. Tends to be a little bit more stressed, a little bit more reserved, a little bit more serious. So really, I'm going to give you permission to play around with your nonverbal cues, to play around with your facial expressions, to learn to be more positive, more open, more welcoming, and more engaging. Give yourself permission to have a little smile on your face when you're talking to someone else. When you're doing the active listening and you're smiling and you're nodding along, right? In a casual setting, it can go a long way. Give yourself permission to really experiment, to try things on, to see what you like, to see what you don't like. Changing your nonverbal cues will be hard at first. It will be hard at first, especially if you're not used to the new nonverbal behaviors. If you have spent your entire life feeling uncomfortable and uncertain, it's going to feel really, really weird to stand up straight and fake the confidence. Okay? Give yourself permission to start with one small thing at a time, even if that's just giving yourself permission to smile more. Okay? Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Your 5-Letter Word. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And as always, I love to hear about your breakthroughs. I'm here to serve your soul a cup of peace and a slice of joy. Until next time, take care.